you've got the keys to a really powerful relationship that is going to endure even after the dog has passed on. Is going to be this golden memory that you'll always have.
You're listening to the That Dog podcast, the show that brings you life lessons from dogs, shared by the people who love them most. I'm your host, Harriet Alexander, here to discover another That Dog story. I'm very pleased to be introducing today's guest, as it's always wonderful to speak with people who've been finding ways to improve entire industries and promote better welfare for dogs. Lisa Tenzin-Dolma is the founder and director of the International School of Canine Psychology and Behaviour, which is a global educational organisation providing learning opportunities on a huge range of topics relating to dog behaviour, well-being and welfare. Lisa is also the founder of the Dog Welfare Alliance and a co-founder of the International Companion Animal Network. Outside of dogs, she's also a musician, songwriter, and the author of 34 books, 6 of which are about dog behaviour. So Lisa, I'm really delighted to have you here and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Harriet.
You've been involved in the dog world in so many interesting ways over the years. So I'd love to know how you first found this world and what led you to working with dogs in the first place.
I grew up with dogs. There's photos of me at a very, very young age, toddler stage, with dogs. So I always loved dogs. We had all different breeds, mostly rescues, which back in those days in England was pretty unusual. But my parents were really passionate about rescue dogs. And then there came a point where I was fostering a young pup who had quite a lot of challenging behaviours. And a young collie pup, he was absolutely lovely and he went to a wonderful home. But it really got me thinking about dog behaviour. I'd always been fascinated by human psychology and I'd studied that a lot, but it hadn't really occurred to me up till that point. I just accepted all these dogs in my life and it hadn't really occurred to me to investigate what made them tick and how we could help them best rather than just live alongside them. So I studied it and qualified as a dog psychologist and behaviourist. And this puppy was a big factor in it, thinking, how can I help him? And I didn't really have the understanding or skills to be able to help him more than doing the basics with him so that he was happily homed, and he did very well. I met him a few times after he was homed and he did great, so that was wonderful. So that got me on the path really, and I was teaching little workshops and things, and then I got Skye, who we'll be talking about, my deerhound mix, who came to me as a puppy, and I was just so fascinated by how his mind worked, how he behaved, how he responded to everything, that I decided it would be good to do a course on this, on dog behaviour, and to actually write a course on it, using what I've learned through my own studies and qualifications, but also what I was learning from him. So at that time, I was a member of I still am, a member of the Association of Inch Dogs. And I talked to the 3 people on the committee at the time, Theo, Sue and Jane, and said, what do you think about a distance learning course? Because hardly anybody was doing that in those days. And they liked the idea. So I wrote the course and I ran it past them. And that was kind of how the ISCP came about. So it was really one dog who had some behaviour issues and lots of fears, who then led me into bringing Skye home and subsequently lots of other dogs too, but really focusing on their emotional states, which I think is the most important thing that we can look at in dogs and with people too, but particularly when we're working with dogs.
Yeah, definitely. It's a bit of a switch, I think, that gets flicked, isn't it, sometimes, where I just remember going from that moment of I like dogs and I've grown up with dogs, and then getting a dog a bit similar to you that sort of had these things I had to look at. And suddenly you start exploring that emotional side, the what does behaviour mean? How do you interpret it? How do you support them? I think it can be hard for some people to turn that off and that can lead down these really interesting paths like you're describing.
Yes, and it's absolutely fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
Topic.
Yeah. And I think the more you learn, the more you unravel that you need to learn more. And then, it's never ending in a way, in a good way.
Yes, yeah, I love it. A few of our students have called it going down the rabbit hole. And it is a bit like that, really, because it takes you off in all these different paths, and you have to explore one little branch of it, and then you find another branch and you explore that. And it's actually I find it incredibly exciting.
Yeah, it's an exciting space to work in for that reason. I'm curious as well then, over the years, what changes have you seen in the industry? And is there anything that really excites you in terms of where things are heading?
I think it's very exciting that there's much more of a focus on compassionate reward-based methods now. Obviously, there are still people using aversive methods, and there are still people who are quite prominent in the media who use those methods, who therefore are very influential. But the really positive aspect of it is that so many more people are exploring reward-based methods, force-free methods, and realizing what a powerful impact that has on their relationships with their dogs. It's the thing that excites me most, how popular it's become. It's almost a mainstream thing now, where it used to be quite fringe. What do you use rewards for your dog? You don't just tell them to go and do this and command them. I really don't like that word command. I find it very uncomfortable. And where you just command the dog to do this. And it's like, well, actually, no, there's this other way of doing it where you actually work with them. And just like with us, we respond so much better if somebody is having a positive attitude towards us than we would do if somebody was shouting at us or criticizing us all the time. It has an incredible impact on you emotionally and on the way that you then perceive yourself and that other person, and then the way that you behave and respond.
And your willingness to learn, right? I think it just shuts down learning as soon as you feel that. I mean, I'm sure most humans have experienced that feeling of why bother to try if you're just going to get this criticism or whatever it might be. So
yeah, that's right. And you can't learn when you're stressed.
No, can't do anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
It is great that shift, I think, like you say, is becoming much more mainstream, which I think then opens up to the deeper conversations you were talking about earlier around emotions and what does a dog really need and all those kind of things, which I don't think you can do if you're too focused on the command and control kind of approach.
That's it. And it's lovely that so many scientists now are bringing out books that are confirming that these methods are the ones that dogs respond to best and that work. There's so many really good books coming out now. I know that you've spoken to Sindor Pangal recently, who is fabulous. Mark Beckhoff, Jessica Pierce, they've written so many brilliant books. Clive Wynne. There's just so many people now who are out there. Zazie Todd is another one whose books actually help to change an enormous number of people's perceptions around dogs. And because they're scientists, they have the research there at their fingertips, they've done their studies, then that kind of makes it, I guess, easier for people to take on board because they have that kind of authority. So yeah, it's incredibly uplifting to see the way that it's going.
For sure. I think we could talk about this for a long time, but we are here to talk about You're That Dog, although I think these things kind of feed into it very nicely. So you mentioned Skye before, but could you introduce Skye, sort of who is Skye and how did you meet in the first place?
Oh, Skye was a deerhound mix. Apparently, they think that he was deerhound Saluki greyhound mix. And certainly he grew from this sort of little puppy who looked very much like a greyhound puppy. He was smooth-coated when he was tiny. And then he became absolutely huge and very hairy. And quite often, even a couple of vets thought he was actually a wolfhound rather than a deerhound because he got so big. But he had these lovely silky ears with these long kind of silky threads coming from them like Salukis do. So there was definitely those two elements to him. I hadn't had a dog for quite a while. I've got 5 children. And while they were growing up, we had dogs when my boys were younger. And then I had quite a large break where I was writing a lot of books and I was really busy with the children. And we didn't have a dog at that point. And I really, really missed having a dog. And I'd fostered this collie pup who I mentioned earlier. And I really wanted to adopt a greyhound. That was my plan. I'd worked with a lot of greyhounds and lurchers and had a really soft spot for them. I love all dogs, but I am a bit of a sucker for the long-nosed ones. And I heard about this puppy. My daughter at the time, in fact, was just coming into her teens, and she was actually quite nervous of big dogs. So when I said to her, she was the last one left at home, and I said I'd really like to adopt a greyhound, and I was looking on the rescue websites and everything, and she was quite nervous about the idea and said, I'm a bit scared of big dogs. I'm not sure that I'm going to be very comfortable. And so I said, well, how about if we got a young dog? And she said, great. So I heard about Skye, and we went and met him, totally fell in love with him, brought him home in my daughter's arms in the car, and she was completely in love the moment they met as well. And that was it, really. And he settled in incredibly well. My daughter, who had been nervous of large dogs, Skye grew up to be absolutely huge. But I also ended up fostering lots of other greyhounds. I adopted another 3 greyhounds. I fostered dogs of other breeds, collie husky mix, little Jack Russell. She was completely comfortable with all of them by then because Skye gave her so much confidence in canine company, basically. And she's a huge dog lover now. It doesn't matter what size they are.
And what was he like as a puppy?
He was adorable. I mean, he had this way of walking. You know how ponies trot and they lift their legs really high? And that's exactly how Skye would walk as a puppy. So he'd be doing this sort of ding, 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 ding through the house and through the garden, wherever he went, this little high step that was just, I don't know, it just made me laugh. It was beautiful to see. So he was really fun. He was like all puppies. It's hard work raising a puppy. You have sort of periods initially where you don't get much sleep because, of course, they've only got tiny bladders and they need to go out a lot during the night. So he was very easy to toilet train. He only had one accident indoors, and that was my fault because I suddenly realised he needed to go and I couldn't get to the door in time. So he was amazingly easy to train, but part of that was because I took him out frequently, really frequently, so that he would learn that the garden was where you go. He was very playful. He was great fun to be around. Everybody loved him. I did have one friend who was very clothes conscious, absolutely beautiful girl. And we still laugh about it now, where initially she would come around wearing these gorgeous dresses and tights and everything. Skye would jump up at her when he was tiny and her tights would just ladder. So she got to the point where whenever she was coming to us, she'd wear trousers. Yeah. And he very quickly learned not to jump up anyway, but it's what puppies do until they learn. And it's their way of getting to you quickly as well. They want to make sure that you're accessible. So there was lots of really funny times with him, lots of very tender times with him and with my daughter. I got some beautiful photos of them together as well. Both of them asleep with him draped over her tummy and his little ears flopping. And he was just adorable. He didn't cause me any problems. We just loved each other's company. I loved raising him. He was happy with the family. He was great with other dogs. His best friend when he was very small was a greyhound who was quite tall, even for a male greyhound. And he used to run underneath his tummy. And he absolutely adored that dog to the point where one day when he saw him in the distance, he did this little spin and I was holding his lead and he actually wrapped me and his lead around this ladder post. He was just so excited. Adolescence had its challenges like it does with all adolescent
It's a wild time, isn't it? Still recovering.
Absolutely. And having raised 5 children, I kind of knew what to really test all the boundaries. If they need to find their own way, they're growing up, the hormones have kicked in and everything goes a bit crazy. And so, yeah, we went through the adolescent stage with him, which had some very, very funny moments. And it came to quite a sudden halt, really. I was working on a book. At the time, I had a very tight deadline. And so I had this big bean bag in my office that he used to love lying on. And he'd just keep me company. And if he wanted to play, then he'd let me know and I'd usually get up and play. But that particular day, I was under a lot of pressure and we'd been out for a walk, we'd had a play, and then he had a little nap while I was working. And he decided that he wanted to play, and he got up and he pointed his nose at the shelf where his favourite toy was. And I said, not now, Skye, which usually he just accepted quite happily. I said, a few more minutes, not that. And he lay down, then he got up, and this kind of happened a few times. And then he realised that, in fact, I wasn't going to get up and play with this toy. And so he stood on the beanbag and looked directly at me and peed on it. And I was trying so hard not to laugh.
Yeah.
And it was like this act of defiance. And my children obviously hadn't peed on anything in front of me, but I could remember them giving me that specific look. And now what are you going to do? And so I just picked the beanbag up, carried it out, put it in the shed, and he trotted along next to me. I had to go in another room to laugh. And I just fell apart in another room, and then came back in. And he settled down. And after he'd settled down for a little while, I got this chapter finished. I took him out. But the interesting thing was, that was like this little marker of the end of the adolescent behaviour. He just became completely mellow after that. And yet nothing had happened. I mean, I didn't tell him off or anything. I just removed the beanbag.
Yeah.
But it was like he decided, oh, okay, well, I don't need to push the bag.
Yeah. I've said what I need to say.
He was incredibly good fun to have around. He just made me laugh so much at the time. He was great.
I think it's good that you mention adolescence, because it can be a bit of a tricky time, and it is amazing how they're very distinct phases, that kind of puppyhood and adolescence and adulthood. It can be quite sudden when they come into them. I have found that overnight they're a bit different. So I think it illustrates that you do have to hold on and just laugh about it, actually have a good sense of hearing it. I think that really helps.
I think you definitely need a sense of humour. And in fact, there are so many funny aspects to it. But I think it is important that you have a sense of humour about it, because the majority of dogs ending up in rescue are adolescent dogs, because people can't cope. They've had this puppy, they've taught them what they want them to know, and that the puppy's complying quite nicely, and then all of a sudden they turn into this little wild soul. And sometimes people just can't cope with that and relinquish the dog, and that's just heartbreaking. Hard for the person, I'm sure, and heartbreaking for the dog. And so I think just retaining your sense of humour, and also have it running around your head if it's a particularly challenging day of, this will pass, this really will pass. Yeah. And at the end of it, it's going to be fantastic. So
yeah, definitely. I think chatting to other people who are going through it can be helpful too. I know when I have clients on classes that have adolescent dogs, they have a lot of discussions about, oh yes, that's happening for me too, and that's happening for me too. And I think knowing that it's normal, it can.
You're not alone.
You're not alone. Yeah. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. I'm curious as well, because you spoke about how your daughter was a bit reluctant around a large dog. And obviously you had 5 children as well, and I assume dogs throughout their upbringing. Do you have any advice around dogs and children and how to navigate some of those early phases when you introduce a new dog?
I think for one thing, make the children aware that dogs need space. Create boundaries for the children. When you think that the majority of dog bites are with young children, and certainly with very small children, it has been found that a young child, a toddler, will interpret a dog baring its teeth as smiling and go closer, rather than where with most of us, as you get older, you would back off. So I think the most important thing to teach young children, or any children really, is respecting the dog, respecting the dog's space and boundaries, having a place where the dog can go to, where the children can't go and, interrupt the dog's sleep or resting time or peaceful time. And teaching children about dog behaviour. Jill Brightner has got a fabulous app that you can put on a smartphone that teaches children particularly. I've used it a lot with children. I mean, it's for adults as well. The Dog Decoder, it's called. And it's got lots of cartoons on that show body language and how a dog is feeling and what that body language means. And I think that's really important, to teach children about that, because then they're less likely to pester the dog if the dog is needing a quiet space or is wanting to sleep. And as far as a dog is concerned, have boundaries in place. Like if you've got young children running about, then as well as them respecting the dog, you don't let them run about with food in their hands, because that is going to be too tempting as far as the dog's concerned. And you really don't want food to be snatched from your child. And positive reinforcement. If the child helps with feeding, with going out for walks with you and everything, so that they get that opportunity to bond with the dog. And I've known some beautiful relationships between dogs and children, and certainly in my family, the relationship Amber had with Skye was really quite special. But one of my other sons, Dan, he must have been about 4 at the time. And we were living in Ireland back then, in the middle of the country. And we had this lovely collie mix who was a puppy when he came to us. And Dan and this puppy really, really bonded and spent so much time playing together. We had an egg garden there and lots of fields around us, and they just run around with each other, lie down and nap together. It was beautiful to see. There can be a very, very special bond between children and dogs. And I think most of us who grew up with dogs remember experiences with those dogs and the relationship that we had with them. I still sometimes think about Bobby, this collie that my parents got from a rescue centre when I was 7 years old. And we would just go off wandering all day together in the woods. In those days, you could do that. It was this amazing kind of golden time in my childhood, really, with him.
Yeah, I don't think I'd be doing what I'm doing today if I hadn't grown up with dogs. They're a huge part of that interest and a huge comfort when I was little too, I think.
I've found a lot of children, if they're troubled, they'll find it easier to talk to the dog about their troubles than they will about talking to their parents or another adult.
I recall long chats in the garden. The injustices of being 8. Switching gear a little bit. Obviously, when you got Skye, you knew a lot already. You knew how to approach different things from a behaviour perspective. But I think every dog does throw up interesting surprises or sometimes challenges some of your thinking. Was there anything that Skye prompted in you in terms of how you thought about dogs or even how you approached your work?
Oh, my goodness. With Skye, I learned so much about emotions by observing him. When you're working with dogs, you spend quite a short time with them and you're observing them very closely. You don't get to see what happens after the person's gone home with their dog. You get to hear about it, but you're not there to see it. And I found it really quite magical, being able to just observe Skye, see how he responded to everything, how to interpret what he was feeling. He was an incredibly expressive dog. Even something like the little quirk of one ear would be saying something. And I just found it fascinating. And he would watch me as much as I would watch him. It was a two-way thing. Dogs are very good anthropologists. They read us incredibly well, very often better than humans read dogs. And their brains work in such a way through evolving to having lived alongside us for so long that they're really tuned into us. And it's partly a safety mechanism. They don't want to be around a human who might turn violent, but it's partly because they become so bonded with us. And that two-way communication that we have with them, I think, is something that is very special and very inspiring. So with Skye, he really honed my communication interpretation skills. And then the game was really upped when I adopted Charlie, a feral dog who I wrote a book about, Charlie, the dog who came into the wild. And he wasn't at all accustomed to being in human company, let alone living in a home. He was a wild soul. And so what I learned from Skye in communicating and the impact of my forms of communication as well, what body language I was using, what facial expressions. With Charlie, it was stepped up to the point where I had to be incredibly aware at all times of what I was communicating to him because he was so fearful. And Skye taught me a great deal of that. He was kind of like the preparation for Charlie, really. We adopted and fostered other dogs too, but Charlie was the most challenging of all of them, and incredibly rewarding to see him blossom as well. But again, a lot of that was to do with Skye. He taught Charlie that it was safe to live around people. He gave him confidence, and he was this kind of wonderful mental figure. There's one story that I tell in the Charlie, the dog who came in from the Wild book, about the first time Charlie went up the stairs. He'd been with us several months by then, and he never even acknowledged the fact that we had stairs. And there was a massive thunderstorm. He was terrified. And he shot up the stairs and got stuck halfway up and didn't know what to do. And Skye was upstairs. He actually saw Charlie, and he walked down the stairs past Charlie very slowly. Then he walked back up, and then he walked down until Charlie realised that, okay, when Skye went back up, he had followed him. What an incredible mentor to have, and how much dogs learn from each other. I think it's something that we underestimate a great deal.
Mm. And some dogs, I think, as well, do seem to have a natural, well, I guess a lot of them do, to be honest, but there are some, I think, that almost take on that mentor role quite naturally, and they are very good communicators and can recognise, I think, the emotional states of other dogs incredibly well. And it sounds like Skye fell into that category.
If we were looking at it in human terms, we call him an empath, because he picked up so strongly on people's feelings, but also other dogs' feelings. I had so many dogs who came to me. Several of them came for terminal care, elderly dogs or very sick dogs who were dying. And Skye knew exactly how to be with each dog. He knew which dogs needed someone to play with. He would inhibit himself a great deal in play. I've got some fabulous videos of him with Shep, this 15-year-old collie husky cross who came to me for terminal care, who was only expected to live 2 weeks and lived 3 months and had the most joyous 3 months imaginable. I've got these lovely videos where he wanted to play with Skye. Shep had to learn to walk. He couldn't walk. He couldn't stay upright when he first came to me, and lots and lots of major health issues. And they started playing, and Shep's face just lit up that Skye wanted to play with him. Skye was twice his size. He was fully grown by then, and Shep was quite a chunky dog. And he was keeping his body low through everything they did in the game. He was almost crouching and being very careful not to bump into him. And so he was different with every single dog.
It's the age-old nature versus nurture question. But do you think, in terms of how you raise Skye to start with, do you think there are ways to facilitate those skills to be as good as they are?
I don't know. I think he naturally had that in him.
Yeah.
I brought him up, using compassionate methods, force-free methods, everything that I teach and everything that we teach at the ISCP is how I raised Skye. And so he was an incredibly easy dog to be around. We didn't really have any behaviour issues. So the way that he was brought up helped, but I think that probably Skye already had something there that made him particularly sensitive. And sighthounds tend to be very sensitive dogs anyway. I'm sure you've found that because you've had sighthounds. Very emotional, and they pick up on emotions and they respond to other people's emotions. And so I think it was a combination of nature and nurture with Skye.
Yeah, which I guess it always is, isn't it? But interesting. I guess you can never say exactly, but I imagine if you're allowed to communicate freely and if you feel comfortable and safe, particularly with your caregiver, I would suspect it's going to allow you to feel confident about approaching different dogs. Or I think it just frees up probably something that was naturally within him as well, potentially. And so he was a sighthound mix, potentially a mix of the Saluki deerhound and greyhound. Did he have much of a prey drive?
He did. I mean, he would chase things because that's what they do. Mm-hmm. It's sparked by vision. And if something's moving fast, then there's that urge to chase.
Yeah.
It was never a problem in the sense that I was never worried about him with small dogs. So I was very fortunate in that respect. I know that some of the greyhounds who I adopted and who I fostered, one in particular who I fostered had just come off the tracks and had an incredibly high prey drive and didn't recognise any other dogs that weren't greyhounds. But fortunately, Skye, I never had that issue with. I think Probably partly because he'd grown up with the company of other dogs. He had lots of friends, dog friends. He'd met small dogs from being a puppy. So it was never an issue.
Yeah. And I think we're both obviously self-confessed sighthound lovers. But
yes.
if people are interested in sighthounds, there's some things that you feel are useful to bear in mind.
I think the first thing is there's this common perception of greyhounds in particular, but sighthounds in general, that they've got masses and masses of energy. You're going to have to be constantly exercising them. And it's completely the opposite. They're sprinters. We call them 40 miles per hour couch potatoes, basically. They're very fast when they run, but they only have bursts of energy and then they're tired, and they do like to sleep a lot. I'm sure you found that as well, Harriet, that they love their sleep.
Very lazy.
And we were saying, earlier on, incredibly relaxing to be around. There is nothing quite like being in the same room as a sleeping sighthound or a few sleeping sighthounds. So they just have this kind of chilled out energy that is lovely. So they don't need a lot of exercise. Let them have a run if they want a run, but they're going to need to sleep afterwards. They've got very thin skin. It's kind of interesting. We use that term, somebody is thin-skinned, meaning they're very sensitive. And they literally do have very thin skin, so they injure very easily. But they're thin-skinned emotionally as well. They're very sensitive to what's going on around them. And they get very stressed if they're in a very stressy atmosphere. They're much more comfortable if people are chilled out or happy. They tend to curl up incredibly small. It's something that has always amazed me, how there'd be this little tiny space and this dog would fold into it. And I did it, all of my other sighthounds did. And it's almost like a contortionist. Basically, they just need you to be kind to them. They don't cope well with loud voices. Treat them gently. They're very gentle souls. They do have a prey drive, particularly ex-racing greyhounds who were trained from puppyhood to chase small furry objects. So if you've adopted an adult dog rather than raised a puppy, then you do need to be aware that if it's an ex-racing greyhound, they'll only have met and lived with other greyhounds. They'll have been handled. So they're usually used to being handled. Quite often their ears are very roughly handled because with racing dogs, they usually tattoo their ears. And so before a race, their ears get handled quite roughly by the handler to check the tattoos, to check it is the right dog. So their ears are very sensitive as well. And as far as the prey drive is concerned, I would say certainly make sure that they're on a sort of nice long loose leash, that you can keep them under control if there are small dogs around and you're not sure how they're going to respond to small dogs. Very careful introductions to other dogs. The 10-second rule of, no more than 10 seconds of interaction, moves them away. And then if all's good, allow another 10 seconds. That means that you're not giving them enough time to actually react and take a pop. If they feel put on the spot, you're giving them just enough space to say hello and get a little sniff. And then they're being safely removed away so that they don't feel under any pressure to interact with the other dog. But generally, I would say just enjoy them because they've got beautiful natures. They're incredibly gentle dogs and they are really, really lovely company. So just enjoy having them around.
Yeah, I think you're right. They are very relaxing to be around. I was thinking as well, in terms of that prey drive, it comes back in a way to earlier you were talking about body language and how important that is to understand it. Because I think with all dogs, but with the sighthounds in particular, they are quite clear communicators. So you do get to know, I think, what that prey sort of prey stance looks like and the difference between being quite excited about just meeting a dog versus going into a more predatory kind of state or whatever it might be. So I think, especially the ears, I find they have very expressive ears often.
Oh, amazingly. Yes.
Yes. Skye obviously had a big impact, like you were saying, on how you approach dogs generally and deepening that understanding of two-way communication. But in terms of you as a person, what impact did Skye have on you?
Oh, how to be more in tune with dogs, really. I've always loved dogs, but had to really connect with them. I think that's what he taught me the most, because he was so open to connection. He was incredibly patient. And that was something that I think he taught me to be more patient as well, particularly when he was an adolescent. Was getting up to no good a lot of the time. I learned a lot about patience then, and just seeing the funny side of it. I think sometimes relationships with dogs can be taken quite seriously. And it's important that we do take those relationships seriously, but we also need to enjoy them and just have fun with them and allow them to have fun. Skye died 3 years ago at 10 years old, and I still miss him terribly. I miss all of my dogs, but particularly Skye. He taught me to enjoy that connection, really feel that connection and understand how to deepen it rather than explore it a bit and think, oh, well, here's me and here's a dog. Actually, here's two living beings, sentient beings who have got quite different perspectives on the world. And isn't it the most exciting thing imaginable to have some form of meeting of minds and emotions and to be able to understand each other and preempt each other as well, to kind of know how the other one is going to respond. So he was an enormous gift in my life.
An amazing friendship by the sounds of it too. Yeah.
Absolutely.
How it should be, ideally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was my best friend. You know, he really was.
It's hard to wrap it all into one thing, of course, but in terms of the lessons that Skye taught you and what you're saying in terms of that relationship, is there one key piece of advice or something you feel we haven't touched on that for those listening you feel would be a useful thing for them to think about?
I would say relax around the dogs in your life and observe them. Really learn to key into how they're feeling by what they're expressing in their body language and facial expressions. To me, it's the most important thing, because what we're dealing with our dogs is their emotional states, just like we do with other people, and everything hinges on how they're feeling emotionally. So if you observe them and you understand them, you then got to figure out what is creating that emotional state, where it's springing from, what the trigger for it is, particularly if it's a difficult one, but also what they most enjoy doing with you. You've got the keys to a really powerful relationship that is going to endure even after the dog has passed on. Is going to be this golden memory that you'll always have.
Yeah, that's lovely. And I think relaxing, is a big one, because I think we can put a lot of pressure. I know I do it sometimes as well. I'm guilty of it. Put so much pressure on ourselves and then therefore on them to be a certain way or behave a certain way or whatever it might be. So I think being curious rather than judgmental or rushing to try to find a solution.
Yeah, being curious and flexible as well. I've noticed that quite often people expect a lot more of their dogs than they would expect of their children. And look at it from that perspective of are you expecting too much of your dog? This is a dog who you're dealing with rather than a little robot who does what they're told all the time or is always perfectly behaved. And so by being flexible and just remembering that they are dogs and they've got a different way of looking at the world, the way that they pick up scents in itself, their olfactory sense is so incredibly powerful. I would love to be able to see what the world looks like through a dog's nose.
Yeah, me too.
Because it must be phenomenal. And we don't have that, but it's good to be aware that what a dog is experiencing is something that we might not be able to tap into ourselves, and respect that in them and be flexible in our relationships with them, so that it's a mutual relationship rather than, what would you call it, like master and slave relationships, which is how it used to be with people and dogs. And thank goodness we've moved a long, long way from that now. And I think very often if a dog is a bit bouncy or something, people can quite often get embarrassed around other people. I feel that the dog's letting them down and they're showing themselves up as not being very good caregivers. And it's not the case. I think sometimes it's a good idea to think, well, would this behaviour be okay if that was my child? Would I be embarrassed if my child was sort of dancing around the living room when somebody came in? If not, then why am I embarrassed that my dog is? Why don't I just celebrate it as this kind of expression of joy? I think it's good to just relax into our relationships with dogs.
That thing about wanting things to happen quickly or in a certain way, especially with young dogs. I see it a lot with puppies that we want them to grow up so fast. And within 3 months, they should know absolutely everything. I understand where it comes from because I think there's a lot of pressure when people look at things online or hear things from other people. There is a lot of pressure on the caregiver to be able to achieve all these things, which are quite unrealistic. So I think we should extend the same compassion to ourselves to not have to get everything right all the time.
Yes, absolutely.
And if people are interested in learning more about you and your work or the various kind of organisations that you're involved in, where can they find you?
The website for the International School for Canine Psychology and Behaviour, which I founded, is www.discp.com. So that gives information about all our courses. We've talked quite a lot about body language, and we've got a fabulous advanced body language course in the school. Mm-hmm. We teach courses in all aspects of canine behaviour, all different levels, from beginner up to degree level. Got a course in canine nutrition, in canine handling, in aggression issues in dogs, in body language. There's a very wide range in there, but we've also got some very tiny, very inexpensive courses called the BFF Awards. With Interdogs, I'm now a patron of Interdogs. I was chaired for a few years, and they're doing great work in bringing together professionals in the dog world. So that's www.interdogs.org. There's a free mini book that I wrote called Adopting a Rescue Dog that you can just go onto the website and download the PDF files for it. So there's quite a lot of places where you can find out more.
Yeah. I would definitely encourage people to go and check all those things out, and we'll put the links into the show notes as well. So people can
thank you, Harriet.
Find it easy. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Lisa. It's been so lovely to talk about you and learn about Skye. I definitely have a lurcher or sighthound bias, so I love hearing about them, but also
lovely.
It sounds like he was such a special dog and also helped many other dogs, which is so wonderful to see that kind of flow-on effect. So thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And it's been lovely to speak with you.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I really enjoyed speaking with you, Harriet.
Thanks for listening to the That Dog podcast, hosted and produced by me, Harriet Alexander of All Dogs Are Good. You can find out more about my work by visiting alldogsaregood.com. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favourite platform. And if you enjoyed the show and want to hear more, leave a review. It really does help the podcast. And now, it's time to go and learn from your dog.